All right, welcome everyone to the Messiah Hour here on IsraelSportsNewsRadio.com. Thank you everyone for joining us. If you want to email me throughout the program, you can do so at MessiahHour@gmail.com, or you can email the station at IsraelSportsNewsRadio@gmail.com. We have a lot of exciting programs coming up on the horizon, so stay tuned. You can find me on Facebook under Ari Lewis and find out any updates on the show. We have a very exciting guest. We're going to talk about a very interesting topic we've discussed a few times on the show, but it's actually great timing. On the line right now, well-known historian and rabbi author of the book World Perfect and Crash Course Guide into Jewish History, Rabbi Ken Spiro. Rabbi, how you doing out there?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So we have Pesach coming up this Shabbat, and we've talked about this before, but if you could just give a refresher course on the concept of blood moons, because we will have a blood moon this Shabbat on Pesach. So please tell our audience what blood moons are all about.
Sure. So a blood moon is actually a euphemism for a full lunar eclipse, because as the wavelengths of light are bent, red being the longest, in a full lunar eclipse, the moon takes on the color of red or blood. So that's what the blood moon is in general. With the tetrad, is a more interesting phenomenon. It's when you get 4 lunar eclipses in a row with no partial eclipses in the middle. We've had some solar eclipses in the middle, but no part. So that's a much more rare phenomenon. And what's especially interesting about what we're in the middle of now, literally in the middle of now, is that we're getting them on the major Jewish holidays. In April 15th, 2014, the first night of Passover was a full lunar eclipse, and then October 8th, 2014, which is the first night of Sukkot, or the Feast of the Tabernacles, was a full lunar eclipse. And April 4th, the first night of Pesach this year, Passover this year, we're going to have another lunar eclipse, and then the last one is going to be September 28th, 2015, which is the first night again of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. So it's the 4 major pilgrimage holidays, boom, 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 back to back, in a row, with a partial solar eclipse, by the way, in the middle on what was the Jewish New Year. And there's actually, interestingly enough, I was in Prague on a speaking tour, and not last Friday, the Friday before, everyone was stopping and looking up because there was a partial solar eclipse visible from Europe and a total solar eclipse over, I think, further north you went. So it's an unusual occurrence. We're right in the middle of it. And overlaying that, the current events going on in the world, there seems to be a pretty close connection, because in Jewish consciousness, there's an idea that what happens up in the heavens somehow is reflected down here on the planet Earth.
Now, the last time we had you on was around Hanukkah time, and then we had you, of course, a year before to talk about the blood moon concept. What do you think has occurred since Hanukkah time up until now, where people should maybe be more concerned or cautious of things going on in the world?
Well, certainly the big events of the Middle East in general, and specifically Iran. I mean, the timing is unbelievable what's been going on. Nothing to do with the tetrads, but we had that holiday of Purim, which commemorates 2,500 years ago the salvation of the Jews at the hands of Haman, who wanted to exterminate the Jewish people. And literally on the fast of Esther, which takes place the day before Purim, which is when Esther goes in, the queen, to plead with the emperor to spare the Jewish people's lives, you have Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, in that very controversial speech in Congress, basically standing before the Congress of the United States and pleading, once again, that in that case it was the Persia, which is today Iran, that we should be spared from destruction at the hands of the Persians. So I thought that one was pretty unbelievable. But that what you have going on right now, literally as I'm speaking, is we're about to hit this deadline for negotiations with Iran that has been stalling for literally years, slowly building up its ability to create a nuclear weapon, where America is desperately trying, I would say President Obama is desperately trying to do a deal with them, which is going to enable them to go nuclear. So, and that has certainly taken off in a big way. Since December, we see that we're literally in a period of time of 24 hours that are crucial to the future of certainly the state of Israel and the entire world, for that matter, whether Iran is going to be allowed to continue its march towards being able to be a nuclear-armed country, which, according to the current deal, looks like they're going to well be able to do.
Now, there was something very scary last week. President Obama, for some reason, released Israel's nuclear secrets, which certainly violates protocol of two friendly nations. Not to get too political with you, but as far as set up with the whole Iran going nuclear, was that a strategy to say, hey, Israel has nukes, So Iran should have nukes, and we have nukes, and we need to move on and let Iran do what they want to do. Do you think that was the president's strategy, and why this was set up with this particular deadline?
Yeah, nothing is done by accident. I mean, no president blurts things out like that. I mean, but to be accurate, America can only estimate. Israel has a policy since it had as a nuclear reactor in Dimona of ambiguity, it's called. And they say, we will not be the first people to introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East. So while Israel's never admitted this, it's generally assumed that Israel has, I don't know, between 80 to 200 nuclear warheads and second strike capability that has to its submarine fleet, etc. Of course, it's always in the background. And for the President of the United States to openly say it, I would say it has a bunch of different Obama is extremely upset with Bibi Netanyahu, and he's very upset with him. What was perceived interference in American politics, although America is arguably doing much more in Israeli politics. But you notice recently there's a leak that somehow Israel was spying on America's negotiations and leaking that information. So this is his way of doing tit for tat. And dumping information on there, which is a way of punishing Israel, leaking information which shouldn't be spelled out, and of course, as you said correctly, implying that, well, look, there is already a nuclear power in the Middle East, so what do we care? We'll just have like U.S. and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. We'll have this balance of power of different nuclear powers. The problem is, and this is something that people aren't aware of, during the Cold War, one of the advantages of being at odds with atheist communist Russia is a country that's communist and atheist, and they believe that this world is all there is. They're not so anxious to launch their missiles and then we launched ours and then the world comes to an end and life as we know it ceases. So that's sort of that what was called MAD, mutually assured destruction, preserved a certain balance of terror and quiet in the world from the end of World War II through the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990. But when you're dealing with a Shiite regime, which are we call them 12th generation imamers, who believe in the return of the disappearing 12th imam who will come back as the Messiah, and the events that will lead to his return will be a cataclysmic end of days scenario, similar to like the wars of Gog and Magog, or we talk about the book of Revelations in the Christian Bible. People like that who actually believe that bringing Armageddon to the world will hasten the redemption, and people who believe that there definitely is a world to come where you're going to get 72 virgins, these are not people you want to let have nuclear weapons. And the fact that people don't see this or unwilling to say it, and you notice with the Obama administration, he will never, ever, ever say the word Islam, which is scary because this is exactly what it is. It's Shiite Islam, and to ignore the realities of their theology is incredibly dangerous because they have huge implications for the practical realities in the Middle East.
Again, you're listening to the Messiah Hour here on IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio.com, and our guest this afternoon is historian and Rabbi Ken Spiro. Rabbi, a lot of people thought a few years ago when Ahmadinejad was not in power in Iran that we kind of dodged the bullet and that we're on a safe course. I want to know if you could tell our audience about the current leadership, if they're worse than Ahmadinejad or the same or not as bad, so please tell us about that.
Yeah, so a guy like Ahmadinejad had a big mouth and liked to make pronouncements. What people don't realize is that Iran is a theocracy, and the mullahs run that country. And their agenda has not changed. Really, from Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979 till the present, their theology is their theology. And when you're dealing with theology, theology doesn't really change. It's their basic religious tenets. So to think that we are like in a better situation now than before, it's actually more dangerous because I always prefer enemies who are honest and open. A guy like Rouhani, who's the current president, he may be a little less belligerent and pompous than Ahmadinejad, but the mullahs who are running the show in Iran are the same people. And even the so-called moderates who challenge them, their idea of moderation would be extreme by anyone's standards. So one should never confuse what's said openly. And this is not just with Iran. Yasser Arafat used to say very pleasant things in English to the press, but when he spoke in Arabic, he was incredibly confrontational and even genocidal in the message he was giving over to the Palestinians about what they're going to do to Israel. So like they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Rhetoric aside, the situation is exactly the same, and Iran has been marching for over a decade and stalling to get its nuclear weapons program off the ground. And they know that as that democracies, especially the Obama administration, that do not want to go to war, especially having pulled out of Afghanistan and Iraq, don't want to recommit, they're just looking for any nice words and fluffy statements that they can latch onto to make some sort of progress and go forward. And also Obama needs to leave his legacy, since he hasn't really left a legacy. Every president wants to do something that'll be in the books for. And it's clear that his thing is to make a deal with Iran, and somehow out of an interesting combination of, I would say, arrogance and ignorance, think that this deal will actually bring peace. And the closest historical parallel I could think of to what Obama is doing today is Neville Chamberlain going to Hitler in 1938, a few months before the start of the World War II, signing that paper which he waved in the air and then he pronounced, "This guarantees peace in our lifetime." And within a few months, the greatest war in human history started, and 50 million people, including 6 million Jews, died. So, that the weakness of democracy is it doesn't like to fight. Peace between democracies is valuable, and the only, I don't know if you're aware, but no democracy has ever gone to war with another democracy. All wars you could think of, especially in modern history, are totalitarian regimes killing each other or attacking democracies. So to do deals like this, a Chamberlain or an Obama doing a deal with someone who's even more dangerous than a Hitler because he will have weapons of mass destruction, is fantastically dangerous, not just for Israel, but for the whole world.
Do you think it's possible that someone from the United States and the government or a military person could get in Obama's ear and tell how dangerous this is to allow Iran to develop a nuclear program and to not stop them in any way, shape, or form?
No, I do not believe. I think it's very clear the Republicans, that the U.S. government is split in a way I've never seen it split since the Civil War, in my opinion. I mean, really split on so many issues, this being a big one. And I don't believe that there's any way, and remember, the Senate and the Congress are Republican-controlled now. There's nothing is going to stop Obama from doing this deal, unless is what I'm praying for in the next 24 hours, unless Iran just digs its feet in and makes demands that not even America and the Europeans can agree to. And they do have some red lines, to be fair. It's not like they'll say a deal at any price, but it's a deal at almost any price. So let's just pray that, like with Yasser Arafat and the PLO, got so close to deals with Israel and then always raised the ante and made it impossible. And their goals were the same. The PLO's goal was always and still is to destroy Israel, and Iran's goal is to dominate the world and destroy Israel, and the little Satan in America, the great Satan, and everyone else who gets in their way.
Right. There was a deal with Yasser Arafat in, I believe, the year 2000 when he was offered 98% of Jerusalem, and he said, "No, I want 100." So the deal fell through. Is that almost what you're praying for? That they'll ask for something totally outrageous that even Obama will say, "No, I can't agree to that."
Right. Well, that's interesting. Why? The bigger question is why, when offered pretty much everything, including for square inches the exact amount of territory, even if it meant swapping territory in Israel for Palestinian territory with those large blocks of settlement, why did Arafat say no? And he openly said, the day I make peace with Israel is the last day I'm alive. And this is another huge lesson. Like they said, the big lessons of the 20th century, which are so applicable today, is you don't do deals with dictators. Only democracies produce real peace and stability, and only treaties between democracies are worth anything. But another rule is that all totalitarian regimes, be they Hitler, be they the communist regime of the Soviet Union, be they Yasser Arafat, be they the Iranians, can only stay in power in a perceived state of conflict with an external enemy. That's how they blame the lack of freedoms and personal comforts and standard of living. We're at war, and the enemy is outside us. The second the Soviet Union ended, the Cold War ceased to exist. Arafat knew the second he made peace with Israel, he'd be killed, not by Israel, but by the Palestinians. And even the Iranians is the same thing. They have to be in this perpetual state of jihad. Because the Iranian street is the most pro-Western Muslim street in the world. That's ironically, not truly pro-Western, it is. People don't appreciate Iran, the government, the mullahs are virulently anti-West, but the Iranian people who are not Arabs, they're Muslims. They have a long tradition, they have a culture, they're well educated, they have a well-developed middle class. These people are fed up with the regime since 1979. They want peace. They tried to overthrow the government in 2009. Obama didn't even open his mouth in support of them. That should have been the real play that America should have made, to do anything in its power to bring that government down. But it wasn't done. So, in short, nothing is going to stop America from trying to make a deal, but it could be that the Iranians might back out in the end anyway, feeling there's more to gain by doing what they're doing.
So let's say the deal is made, and I guess we say God forbid of that, then Iran has their program. What would you see occur in the next few months, few years? What's the stage set for the Middle East after that would happen?
Well, that's the worst. This bad deal, which is worse than no deal. It gives Iran, basically would lift the sanctions. Iran was really up against the ropes economically, and then America was really applying the pressure. That combined with the dramatic drop in the price of oil was killing their economy and putting pressure, and internal pressure economically is the best way to overthrow a government. But if this deal is signed in the current form, and I haven't studied it that carefully, from what I understand, it will allow Iran, which, by the way, has no need for any nuclear program, even a peaceful program, given they have oil reserves enough for 1,000 years, will allow Iran to continue developing its nuclear program, reach what's called a threshold, which means while they may not produce a bomb, they'll produce enough weapons-grade plutonium to very quickly flip over into a nuclear power. Meanwhile, they will gain from that removal of all of these sanctions against their economy and their oil exports, which will allow them to recover economically. So they will be much more stable internally and much more aggressive externally, because the second they actually produce a nuclear weapon, it's a game changer. Because, if when you're fighting a country that only has conventional weapons, that's all they can use against you. But if Iran threatens to launch some sort of nuclear strike against Europe or America, you have to think extremely carefully about what you're going to do to that country. And this, of course, puts Israel in the worst possible situation, because Israel is the first target and a close target, and in the worst neighborhood. And now the world has made peace with Iran, and Israel remains the belligerent obstacle, the thorn in the side of this whole process. And Israel, of course, cannot allow Iran to go nuclear. One thing we Jewish people have learned for thousands of years is when people say they want to kill us, they mean it. They've tried to do it multiple times. Hitler and Purim, and many times in between. And so Israel may have to go alone. And this could be extremely problematic. Because the Iranian nuclear program is very well hidden, very well defended, and spread all over the place. It's not going to be like 1981 when Israel took out Osirak, the Iraqi nuclear program under Saddam Hussein. And at that time, the whole world went nuts and condemned Israel. And I hold that in 1991, Israel should have gotten the Nobel Prize for Peace during the Gulf War. Because had not Israel done that, Iraq would have been a nuclear power in that first Gulf War. And that would have been a game changer for the ability to invade that country. But what we could have now is a situation where Israel is faced with a very difficult situation of trying to strike, the Iranian nuclear program, not being able to destroy it or maybe set it back. It will definitely lead to repercussions and reprisals from Iran directly or indirectly through its proxies like Hezbollah. And we could find the whole world screaming at Israel, how dare you do this? They were a peaceful country, and we signed a deal, and who do you think you are? And as we've learned again, that when people want to say they want to destroy us, they mean what they say. And also, we've also learned not really to rely on non-Jews to defend us. As much as America has been an incredible ally of Israel, bottom line, we have no one to rely on but ourselves. So we're in a very, very scary situation at the moment.
Again, this is the Messiah Hour here on IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio.com, and our guest this afternoon is Rabbi Ken Spiro, well-known historian and lecturer. Rabbi, when I was a kid, people would always ask this question. You're a Jew, you live in America, so if Israel and America would get in a war, who would you support? And I bring this up, I would always say, as you talked about, they're two democracies, they'll never fight each other. But if America makes this deal with Iran, and Bibi's been on the record as saying, we will stop them from getting nukes even if we have to go alone, how will that affect the relationship between America and Israel? Because there was a story where Obama said he would fire on Israeli planes, I guess if they were going to try to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. So tell us about that aspect between America and Israel if they disagree about Iran getting nukes.
Yeah, so I've never heard that story about Obama threatening to fire on Israeli planes. I've never seen that. And I don't personally believe there's ever going to be a situation where America and Israel actually go to war, although anything is possible. The threat, this end of day scenario that's recorded in like Gog and Magog, talking about the coalition of nations coming against Israel, doesn't. And remember, they're writing this. Ezekiel and Zechariah are talking about this vast horde, this mighty army. First of all, obviously it's not relevant to today in terms of the technology. He's giving, when you read things like this in the books of the prophets, you're supposed to take what's the theme. And the theme is clearly the world unites against Israel. And it doesn't mean that every country in the world, all 192 states, will send military forces, God forbid, to attack the Jewish people. But it could mean that Israel is confronted by a local enemy, and the rest of the world stands by and lets Israel be attacked. Right now, the major function America plays in its alliance with Israel, besides sharing of intelligence and technology and development of anti-missile systems and the billions of dollars it gives to Israel in foreign aid, by the way, most of which is a stimulus package for America because it has to be spent back in the United States. But the number one use of America for Israel is a blocking state in terms of organizations, and especially the United Nations Security Council, passing binding resolutions against Israel. And since the UN General Assembly has passed more resolutions against Israel than every other country in the world combined in the last 30 years, and thank God those resolutions are just General Assembly resolutions, are not binding, but Security Council resolutions calling for sanctions against Israel are binding on all member states. And, America has this veto power in the Security Council and has the ability to exert pressure. I saw yesterday in the newspaper that America went after the United Nations Human Rights Council, which is a ridiculous anti-Israel organization, which automatically, whenever it meets, has an automatic agenda item to condemn Israel for its human rights violations. Of course, when they're not paying attention to anything else going on in the world. So, not that America has to physically attack Israel, but if America were to just stand back and say, you know what, you're at the mercy of the world. Security Council resolutions we're not going to block. Even if we don't vote for them, we're not going to use our veto. Israel could find itself on a political level completely isolated, which would have massive economic repercussions should the world call to punish Israel economically by cutting off trade ties or joint development projects. And again, it could also, countries like we saw, England during the last war refused to export to Israel some parts for various weapon systems because of Israel's aggression in Gaza and things like that. So that's a scenario that I believe is quite realistic, could well happen, especially if things move quickly during the Obama administration. If he's out of power and a Republican administration takes over in 2 years, obviously that would, I think, be a very different situation.
Now, we're talking about this blood moon cycle again. Blood moon coming up this Pesach. There was one last Pesach, last Sukkot, and this Sukkot. And a lot of the Christian world was very intrigued by this. Pastor John Hagee wrote a book, and his title was Blood Moon, Something in Israel is Going to Change. In this year period of the 2-year cycle, or year and a half, we saw war last summer, and people, I don't think, realize how close Israel was to not existing. If those 3 boys were not kidnapped, then the IDF wouldn't have gone in and found out about the tunnels. Before we continue what might happen in the next 6 months, I want to know, in your opinion, how close was Israel to perhaps losing that war if Hamas and these terrorist groups would have been able to infiltrate the country through its tunnels?
Yeah, Hamas never, unless they get nuclear weapons, God forbid, Hamas never poses an existential threat to Israel. It's a painful annoyance that causes us much material and manpower loss. Sadly, we lost many soldiers in the last war. My second oldest son was a reservist in that war as a combat medic in the Golani Brigade. He was in there for 34 days. So I don't think it was ever that war was an existential threat to Israel. Although it was a completely unprovoked act, as we saw with the tunnels, but it could have been a real mega terrorist attack on the communities surrounding the Gaza Strip, which could have led to hundreds of deaths and possibly more, and thousands of casualties and massive destruction and damage. It would have been a big, and again, these people don't mind dying, so all the terrorists would have been killed, but they could have done tremendous damage to that specific area of the country. But it's also interesting that you're talking about the blood moons, and we discussed previously, I think last time we spoke, about the moon is associated with the Jewish people because the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar primarily. The months are lunar, and the seasons are solar. But I was thinking the other day when you asked me to do this little interview, it could be a little different take on it, which is not from Jewish sources, just my own idea. The people who are really moon obsessed are the Muslims. They use a purely lunar calendar. I mean, the Christian world uses a solar calendar. Jews use lunar and solar, and to make up for that, 11-day difference between 12 lunar months in a solar year. We have a leap month 7 times in 19 years, but the Muslims use their years are 354 days long. It's 12 lunar months, 12 cycles of the moon orbiting around the Earth. And even on the top of mosques, I don't know if people are aware, your listeners are aware, that the image of Islam is a moon. The top of a mosque is usually a crescent moon or a full circle, and many Islamic countries portray the moon. So, and I think what we've really seen, and since the cycle started, which is a real game changer in the history of the Middle East, is to pull back from the Israel and the Iran thing and look at what's gone on with the Islamic world. We've had a massive meltdown within the Islamic world, where we're seeing develop into, I think, the biggest that I can recall in history, rivalry between these two great movements in Islam, which are the Shiites, led by Iran, and the Sunni world, which is primarily led by Saudi Arabia, Egypt. Most Muslim countries are Sunni. But the entire Middle East is degenerating, and it's spreading, and I would not be surprised if it spreads to other parts of the world, into an unbelievable sectarian Sunni-Shiite conflict, which bodes, on one hand, one could say it's good that they should be fighting each other and not attacking, but it's producing incredible instability in the Middle East. We're now watching, as we speak, Yemen, with the U.S.'s complete lack of desire to intervene anymore, anywhere. So now the Saudis, for the first time in Middle Eastern countries, are sending in their own forces to attack the Houthis, the Shiites who have taken over most of Yemen, because they recognize that if Yemen becomes Shiite, Iran controls the bottom of the Persian Gulf. And that's like a game changer for Saudi Arabia. And so it's an unbelievable thing going on. So maybe this whole moon issue is coming up is also maybe indicating to us the really big change that's going on, which is the dramatic degeneration of the entire Middle East into not the Arab Spring, but the Arab sub-zero Muslim winter, which we're seeing happening before our eyes.
Now, another interesting aspect of this blood moon is, as I mentioned, that the Christian world is intrigued. Again, Pastor Hagee wrote a book, and there's a lot of people studying the Christian world. As I brought up this point last year, I don't know if we've seen a lot of change. The Jewish world does not seem as interested in the blood moon concept. I want to know if you think that has changed at all in the past year since all these things have occurred, and if not, why not?
I don't think that there's been a huge increase. I've written on it like on my blog, and we've spoken about it, and I've spoken primarily to Christians about it. But I do not see any major focus in the Jewish world on this at all. Virtually it goes unmentioned, primarily because A, lot of people don't know about it, and B, the rabbis aren't really speaking about it. I can't recall any major rabbinic authority, personality talking about this anywhere. I haven't done a comprehensive search, but I haven't come across anything in my wanderings across the web or anywhere else. So while I see the Christian world, which is much more interested in this phenomenon and reads much more into it, is following it much more carefully, I don't see the Jewish world looking there. I see the Jewish world definitely looking at the American-Israel relationship and the dramatic changes, geopolitical realities, etc., but it seems to be almost a non-event in the Jewish world.
And why is that? I mean, we know since Shabbatai Tzvi, a lot of Jewish thought has been we don't want to study prophecies because we were fooled before, but I don't know if that makes sense as any type of long-term solution. I mean, the prophecies were written by prophets, people that were pretty smart, people God spoke to. So shouldn't we go back into studying all of Tanakh instead of just part of Tanakh?
Yeah, for sure. You're not supposed to. There's a thing about calculating the end of days. They always say if weathermen were prophets, they'd be working on the stock exchange. Like I always tell when I'm talking about this, I don't know when the Messiah is coming. I'm not a prophet. I would be working on the stock exchange if I was, or at least betting on the Super Bowl.
Right.
But,
yeah, for sure.
But the books of the prophets, these books are in there to tell us. Maimonides, the great medieval Jewish scholar, he says, it's a great quote. He says, there's no explicit mention of the Messiah in the 5 books of Moses, but he's mentioned, of course, in all the later books of the prophets, all the prophecies of all the major and minor prophets in the book of prophets in the Bible, whether it's Isaiah or Habakkuk or Nahum or Malachi or all these people, they always begin with dire warnings of consequences for not keeping the relationship with God and the covenant, and always end with this prophecy of redemption. So from that we can pull out, as Maimonides himself says, and Maimonides actually has in his Mishnah Torah, in his codification of Jewish law, in his book about Jewish kings, he has a whole description, which is quite short, of the job description of the Messiah. And this is culled from just looking into the books of the prophets in various Jewish traditions. So the details we don't have, dates we don't have, but big patterns, like big signs, we absolutely do have. And again, you're right. Jews are, on one hand, we're spiritual people, but tend to be very practical. Jews tend not to focus on this end of days scenario, even though the Christian end of days scenario originates with the Jewish people. The book of Revelation is just, restating concepts which are stated in the books of the prophets, in Ezekiel and Zechariah. But that doesn't mean that if we look at the narrative in the books of the prophets, we clearly see signs, symbols, patterns, and events that will be taking place in history before the advent of the Messiah. And as I've been saying for many years, we're literally about 3 newspaper headlines away from a convergence of biblical end-of-days scenario of what's going on in the news every day. And one of the ones I was always mentioning was Iran going nuclear. I mean, pretty much all the pieces are in place. The only thing we're missing if Iran goes nuclear is a major economic meltdown in the world. To have a perfect scenario set up, which is also, of course, very possible. And so we're not that far away from this. So while I can't give a date, and I don't want people to panic, we should wake up, even Jews for sure, because it's in our Bible, should wake up and take this very seriously. And obviously many Jews are not really familiar with the Bible. Most evangelical Christians know the Bible better than most Jews. But even those Jews who know, Scripture well in the Bible tend not to really focus on this part of the Bible. They tend to be more focused on the 5 books of Moses, and the book of the prophets often gets very neglected, sadly.
Again, this is the Messiah Hour here at IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio.com, and you can email me throughout the show at messiahhour@gmail.com. And our guest this afternoon is well-known historian and lecturer Rabbi Ken Spiro. Rabbi Spiro, we talk about all the time, when there's a negative prophecy, that does not have to happen. Positive prophecies do, and negative prophecies can be avoided through prayer, teshuvah. It's always a good time to pray, but in particular with this deal on the horizon, would that be your advice? If people came to you for rabbinical advice, would you say, go pray very hard, pray in minions, pray wherever you got to, because this deal with Iran can't happen?
Well, you're right that one of the difference, the qualitative difference between positive and negative prophecy, besides positive makes you smile and negative you need Prozac for, is that the positive is guaranteed. We get to the end of the story. Negative is a warning that can be avoided. That the Messiah will come is guaranteed. But what state the Jewish people in the world will be in is up to us. Will there be 7 billion people in the world or 1.5 billion? Will there be 14 million, 13 million Jews in the world or 1.5 million? So that's the amazing interplay between God's infinite knowledge and His will, which always is done, and human free will. So, the beginning is known, the end is guaranteed, but we decide the paths we take. And the weapon in the arsenal of the Jewish people, as you said correctly, is tshuva. And it's multiple times in Jewish sources it says, even there's a famous statement, even when the sword is at your neck, al yanatz min harachamim, never give up hope of mercy. And God says, a very famous quote of the rabbis, it says, God says, open the door of tshuva, the width of an eye of a needle. Make the slightest opening to return to me, God says, and I'll open it so that a wagon will drive through. Meaning, if we just make the effort, like God is a great coach, a coach doesn't want 100% results. He judges you on your efforts. If you try 100% but you don't succeed, the good coach is not going to go after you. You tried. You did your best. So this concept of tshuva, which is often talked about as repentance, is really not a correct translation. Tshuva means return. And, really to stand back and get the big picture, we have to understand we have a contractual agreement with the creator of the universe, the Jewish people. It began with Abraham. We signed on the dotted line at Mount Sinai. The Jewish people have a unique role to play to bring God consciousness and values into the world. And if we don't proactively do that, we don't keep our side of the bargain, then other values will enter the world. Those other values are evil, by the way, the opposite of good, and God is evil. When evil comes into the world, it will target the Jews first, which is an amazing, important point. You can tell how countries are doing internally and how countries are doing by how they treat Israel. How they treat their Jews is an indicator of how they're doing in terms of their human rights, etc., and their values, and how they're treating Israel. It's not an accident the most dangerous rogue states, like North Korea and Iran, are, got Israel in their sights. But we understand we have this contractual agreement, and when bad things happen and threats, this is the negative stuff that was predicted, that is a wake-up call to the Jewish people. And any parent, and God is a parent, He's the ultimate parent, but parents never punish because they want to see their kids suffer. They give their kids tests and trials and punishments to have the children learn and to grow. And that's what it's all about. All this is a powerful wake-up call for us to get back on track. That's what Tshuva is about. And in terms of what we're supposed to do, it's not just a question of praying. Prayer is extremely important. But we have to always follow a three-pronged strategy. And this is based on the way Jacob acts in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, when he's being reunited with his rival twin brother Esau, who he hasn't seen in 22 years and whom he fled from because he wanted to kill him. And, if you look at the Bible, which is a teaching guide, it's telling him, what does he do? A, he sends gifts. You got to pursue a diplomatic initiative. B, he prepares to fight. You got to defend yourself. And C, you got to pray because God runs the world. And obviously, in different situations, there's different courses of action. But we always have to remember, from the Jewish perspective, that it's not just enough to pray. We have to pray. We have to be proactive as Jews. Proactive means doing what the Jewish people are supposed to do, spreading values to the world, being a light to nations. And non-Jews, by the way, who get this message, which a huge chunk of the evangelical Christian world does get, needs to recognize, too, the same thing, that people who believe in God as a source of values recognize that the world is being split here between people who believe in certain values and truths and people who don't. And even though people who don't may be on very different religious and political spectrums, a good example is the alliance of the extreme left in Europe with radical Islam, who are people who should never get along, yet when it comes to bashing Israel, they'll unite. People see there's really a line being drawn in the sand here between two really strong opposing forces. And one of those forces are people who believe there's a God and there's absolute values and there's good and there's evil, and that you have to defend good and destroy evil. And those people who either are representing evil or who are just not into the whole concept of paying any attention to it, are willing to stand back and let evil triumph. But the real message is, of course, for anyone who takes the Bible seriously, and takes God seriously, and takes destiny seriously, is to wake up and to think, what can I do on a personal level with my unique skills? I'm like a snowflake. There's no one else like me in this world. What can I do to make a difference in this world and to act in a way that will put the world in a better place? And as that old Chinese proverb goes, trifles make perfection, but perfection is no trifle. It's people who care and are proactive doing little things that collectively make that big difference. And that is the real message, that all of what's going on now is a wake-up call, not to go back to sleep, not to stick our head in the sand. It doesn't matter whether we believe this or not. It's like gravity. I believe in gravity. You don't. You jump off the building. The same thing's going to happen to both of us. This is reality. You can ignore it and pay the consequences, or we can wake up, take it seriously, recognize that huge wheels are turning, that what's going on in the heavens is an indicator of what's going on down here on earth, and that now is the time for people to be proactive and unify.
Well said. Again, Rabbi Ken Spiro here on the program on the Messiah Hour. Before we let you go, you have a great website. I know you had it up for about 7-8 months. It's very, very nice, kenspiro.com. People can go there if also they want to get your books or take a tour with you. What's the best way to go about doing that?
Yeah, the website has everything there, lots of great material, classes, stuff to read. I can be contacted through there, absolutely. So if you want to learn more or want to be in touch with me, or you're coming to Israel and want a tour, by all means, you're welcome always to be in touch with me via the website.
All right, so you go to kenspiro.com and check that out. Rabbi, I know you had a birthday yesterday, so happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much.
And Chag Sameach to you and your family, and hopefully we'll have a peaceful road to Pesach and peace afterwards, and everything will only work out for good things. So again, thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you very much. This may add, by the way, that final blood moon is in the holiday of Sukkot, and that's the one that's going to be seen in Jerusalem as a lunar eclipse. And Sukkot is the holiday where the nations of the world come together in Jerusalem. So we should merit, by the time we get to that holiday of Tabernacles, Sukkot, in the fall, September 28th, that we should have, hopefully, a world united and moving in the right direction and living in peace.
Amen to that. And again, thank you to the Rabbi. Thank you everyone for listening. This is the Messiah Hour. You can email me, messiahhour@gmail.com, or you can email Israel Sports and News Radio at gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Be well out there and be safe. Shalom.